All through that first day, Esther waited, and still the king did not call. All through the second day, she waited, and still the king did not call. The third day came and went, and no call came from the king. So on the morning of the fourth day, she got up, had her maids do her hair, her face, dressed in the finest of her dresses, and she decided to go and see the king. Taking just one maid with her, she walked gracefully, regally, to the hall of audience. Now, no one was allowed in the hall of audience unless they were invited by the king. It was instant death. The guards at the entrance to the hall saw Queen Esther coming, and they looked at one another. Had she been summoned? No, but she was Queen Esther, the lovely, the beloved Queen Esther. So, of course, they opened the doors and let her in. She entered the hall of audience, and there was her husband, the king, on the throne dealing with matters of state. But people began to notice she was there. People who knew she had not been summoned, and a quiet fell over the room. What would the king do? The king saw her. He raised his head. And he smiled. He raised his royal scepter and leaned it out to her. Queen Esther walked forward, knelt, and kissed the scepter. The king himself raised her up, placed her by his side, and said, "Esther, my darling, it's been too long. What is it you want? Ask me, and I shall give it to you, even up to half the kingdom." "My lord king," said Esther, "all I ask is that this evening you and my lord Haman will come and dine with me." "Ah," said the king. "Haman, you have a dinner invitation. Are you free this evening?" "Of course I am," said Haman. So the two of them went to dinner. Haman was delighted. "I am to dine with the king and queen in their royal apartments. Is there nothing I cannot achieve?" The dinner was lovely. Afterwards, the king was reclining on his couch. He said, "Esther, my darling, tell me what it is you want." "My lord king," said Esther, "I simply ask that tomorrow evening yourself and my lord Haman will dine with me again." "Ah," said Xerxes. "Haman, are you free tomorrow evening?" "I believe I am," said Haman. "Fine," said the king, and he dismissed Haman. Haman walked out feeling on top of the world, and then he saw Mordecai. How powerful am I if I allow a man like this to continue? He was still in a bad mood when he got home. Well, his wife sought to placate him. She said, "Why don't you set your sons to build a scaffold in the back garden, and then tomorrow you can go to the king and ask if you can execute Mordecai yourself in the back garden. Isn't that a good idea?" And Haman thought it was a good idea. He slept very well that night. Haman may have slept, but the king did not. So, as he often did on such nights, he called for the royal record keeper to read to him from the book of the records of the acts of the great King Xerxes. Now, on this particular night, the record keeper read of the plot that Mordecai had uncovered, which saved the king's life. Xerxes asked the record keeper, "What did we do for this man who saved my life?" The record keeper checked the text. Nothing of record here. He read in the margins. He checked in the index. "My lord," said the royal record keeper, "you appear to have done nothing for this man." "Oh," said King Xerxes, "well, I'm not going to stay king long if I don't reward those people who saved my life. Go out into the corridor and see if you can find one of my royal advisors." So the royal record keeper went out into the corridor, and who should he meet but Haman, who was coming to ask the king if he could execute Mordecai. Haman entered the king's presence. "What can I do for you, your majesty?" "Tell me, Haman," said the king, "what should I do for a man who has proved a loyal subject to me?" Haman was delighted. Haman assumed that Xerxes was talking about him. Your Majesty, well, and now this is just an idea off the top of my head, but you could take a gown from the royal wardrobe, one that you have worn in public, and place it on the shoulders of this man. Then take a horse from the royal stables, one that you have been seen riding, and place this man in the gown on the horse, and then set a herald in front of him and have him paraded around the city with the herald declaring, "This is what Xerxes does for those who are loyal to him." "I say, Haman," said Xerxes, "what an excellent idea. I knew you were a good royal advisor. Now, I want you to do exactly as you have told me for Mordecai, for he saved my life some time ago, and I have done nothing to thank him." "Mordecai," said Haman. "Yes," said Xerxes. "Do you know him?" "Yes," said Haman, "I do know him. You want me to do all of this for Mordecai?" "Yes," said Xerxes. "Now, be off. Make it happen." And so Haman went and found Mordecai and placed him in a royal gown and set him on a royal horse and paraded round the city, declaring through clenched teeth, "This is what our king does for those who are loyal to him." By the time he'd finished doing that, he was furious. He was spitting fragments of teeth. But by the time he got home, it was only just time for him to get changed and go back to the palace for supper with the king and queen. And so that's what he did. Haman and King Xerxes gathered for dinner with Queen Esther. The meal was wonderful. Xerxes reclined on the couch but said, "Now, Esther, tell me, what is it that you want?" And the queen kneeled in front of her husband. She said, "I ask for my life and the life of my people, for we are condemned to death. If you had only sold us into slavery, I would not make a fuss. I would go at your command. But we are condemned to death by an enemy. You see, my lord husband, I am Jewish, and so condemned to die by your own proclamation." "But," said Xerxes, "who is this enemy?" "It is, my husband, my lord Haman here." Xerxes began to see what sort of a mess he was in, and he stood up and walked out into the garden. Haman began to understand which way the wind was blowing. "My lady," he said, "your majesty, I did not know, I did not understand." And then he threw himself at Esther's feet, wrapped his arms around her legs, and began to beg for his life. At this moment, Xerxes returns from the garden, sees this man with his arms about his wife's legs, and says, "Guards! This man is assaulting the queen." It didn't take long for the king to decide what was to happen to Haman, and somebody on the staff let slip that Haman had just had a gallows built in his own back garden. You see, Haman didn't have many friends, and so before sunrise, Haman was dead on his own gallows. But the plot was still unfolding. The next day, Esther and Mordecai went to see the king. "My lord," said Esther, "can you revoke your proclamation? Can you change the law?" "Ah," said King Xerxes, "I can't change the law. Otherwise I won't stay as the lord and king of the Medes and the Persians, whose laws are unchanging." "My lord," said Mordecai, "I have a cunning plan. And so a proclamation went out to all the peoples of all the empire, in all the languages of all the peoples of all the empire, carved into tablets of stone, so that they were as unchanging as are the laws of the Medes and the Persians, to say that on the 12th day of the 12th month, all the Jews in all the kingdoms could gather together and defend themselves against any who came against them the next day. And so that is what happened. On the 13th day of the 12th month, some people throughout the kingdoms went to attack their Jewish neighbours. When they found that their Jewish neighbours were armed and ready and had their friends and neighbours alongside to fight with them. In Susa, the fighting was short and sharp. But at the end of the first day, Esther and Mordecai went to see the king, said, in Susa the matter is settled, but in some of your far-flung kingdoms it is not. May we have one more day to defend ourselves? The king said yes, and so it happened. And all across the kingdom, all the kingdoms, the Jews celebrated and praised Queen Esther. And so Xerxes sent out a proclamation to all the Jews of his kingdom, carved into tablets of stone, so that it was as unchanging as is the laws of the Medes and the Persians, that from this day forward, all Jewish people should have a celebration every spring to remember the time when they were saved by the beautiful Queen Esther. And do you know what? Our Jewish brothers and sisters do that to this day. They have a celebration. The entire book is read out to them. They dress up in costumes, and every time they hear the name of Haman, they boo! They have sweet foods and they have a party, and nobody is unhappy. For after all, they had been saved by Queen Esther.